Okay, we're now live.
Okay, welcome everybody to this virtual meeting of the Cabinet Panel on the Environment. My name is Steve Jarvis and I'm going to be chairing the meeting this evening. Now I'm going to hand over to the committee member and scrutiny manager to briefly explain the procedures this evening. Hilary.
Thank you. So I'm not going to say too much tonight, not the lengthy amount we normally say. So attendance, it's a requirement that you can hear and be heard. So when I call your names, do you mind please responding? Councillor Val Bryant?
Yes.
Councillor Dennis Harburg?
Yes.
Councillor Steve Jarvis?
Yes.
Councillor Ian Moody?
Present.
Councillor Gerald Morris?
Present, miss.
Councillor Michael Muir?
Present.
Councillor Claire Strong?
Present.
Councillor Mike Hewson?
Hilary.
Councillor Carol Stanier?
Hello.
And officers, we have Ruben Iathu,
Present.
Georgina Chapman,
Present.
and Daniel Washington.
Present.
Thank you, that's everybody. We also have two members of the public who are Julia Sananda, if you can just confirm you can hear and
Hi, I can hear you.
lovely, and John Webb.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, the meeting is being streamed live on the council's YouTube channel, and if live streaming fails, the meeting will adjourn. If the live stream cannot be restored within a reasonable period, then the remaining business will be considered at a later date. If for any reason the meeting is not quorate, the officer will then notify the attendees. The meeting will adjourn immediately. Once the meeting is quorate, the meeting will resume. If connection cannot be restored within a reasonable period, then the remaining business will be considered at a later date. Please ensure your mobile phone and other noise emitting devices are muted. And please activate the mute button on your tablet when you are not speaking. And please be mindful that people can see what you're doing. If a member of public, a member or the member of public wish to speak, they should use the raise hand button, which is located in participants. Please don't use the reactions button. And please remember to unmute your microphone before speaking. I doubt that the panel will vote because they don't do it very often, but if you decide to do so, then members are aware that you use the green tick for yes, red cross for no, and blue raise hand for abstain in the participant section. And as you know, details of how members voted will not be kept or minuted or be available on the YouTube recording or the audio recording. Are there any questions? Okay, I'll hand over to the chair, Councillor Steve Jarvis. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I believe we have apologies for absence from Sam Collins with Carol Stanier substituting and Kate Hart with Mike Hewson substituting. And I think apart from that, everybody else is here, so there can't be any other apologies. So the usual announcements in accordance with the policy, this meeting's been audio recorded as well as filmed, and the audio recordings are available to view on mod.gov and the film on the film recording on the HPC YouTube channel. And members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item in line with the detailed reminder set out on the agenda. We then move on to item 3, which is an item referred from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Can I interrupt for a second, Steve? I'm not sure what's happening. You sound a bit like you're in a tunnel, in a wind tunnel.
All right.
Yes.
I'll come a bit closer to the microphone. Is that any better? Okay, so we have item 3, which is items referred from the other committees, and we have a referral from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Who's introducing this one?
There's no one to introduce. It's quite a simple referral, really, just that they considered that it would be good if the Cabinet Panel looked at. I'm just trying to find my paperwork.
Yeah, right, I found it now. That we requested to consider air quality in the district, in particularly effect of the COVID-19 pandemic has on areas of poor air quality. And I think
Yes.
that's something that I suggest we take into consideration when considering our work plan for the rest of the year. People can,
Sorry, Steve, you're still in a wind tunnel.
okay. Are people content with that? Yeah. Okay.
Chairman, Chairman, there's a funny background noise as well. I don't know if you've all got it, but it's not a lot we can do about it, I suppose. But anyway, have subtitles.
That's what I'm trying to describe as a wind tunnel, but it is a funny background noise. You're right.
Okay. So that then moves us on to item 4, which is the work programme and action tracker. So Ruben, I assume you're leading on this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to run through those papers there. So there's an information note and there's Appendix A, which is the future programme for the panel and the action tracker. So I'm very briefly going to run through this as and not go line by line. Things to highlight there in the information note. 2.1 talks about the terms of reference being slightly amended. This reflects the fact that we are going to have 2 further cabinet panels, one on planning and transport and one on community engagement and cooperative development, which will be coming on stream in September. So I think the terms of reference is to say that we won't duplicate the work. So we'll just be mindful that, and I think possibly with Daniel's presentation today, we want to make sure that we are focusing on the environmental aspect of transport and not anything further, because another panel will be taking that on. The other thing I want to mention in the information note there is that at 3.1, we now have an environment inbox. So this allows members of the public or organisations to provide suggestions and presentations, so we can pick that up. That we've got a bit more capacity in our team, so we are happy to take that on instead of them going to my colleague Hilary Deneen. But I will highlight that obviously when the minutes go out following this meeting. Moving on to the Appendix A, the chairs and we have sat down and looked at the meetings for the coming year and put topics for conversation and discussion there. Obviously we have the July meeting where Daniel's going to give a presentation on transport. In the September meeting, we're proposing talking about the new normal, recovering from a pandemic, and obviously we'll include the ONS referral at that meeting, which will cover air quality and biodiversity and council operations. The November meeting will talk around food waste, waste and recycling, and something we didn't manage to do last year, but we were keen to do this year, is have a roundup meeting in February to look at what we've achieved and to review the climate change strategy and any of the actions that come from the panel that will feed into our actions and achievements for that year. So that's the proposal. We also have the lengthy action tracker, which we've split up into actions that we've completed, outstanding actions and ongoing actions. Of that, we've completed 16, 24 outgoing and 5 are outstanding. And the caveat there is that COVID-19 has impacted on our ability to take those actions forward. But as we go through the year and we get back to that new normal, we'll look to achieve those outstanding actions, or apologies for that, and those ongoing actions there. But the panel may feel that some of those actions or those outstanding actions or ongoing actions might need to go further up the agenda, given tonight's conversation or just general conversation tonight. And that's all I really wanted to say on the topic.
Thank you, Ruben. So I think we'll maybe deal with this in 3 bits. Firstly, any general questions on what Ruben's had to say. Secondly, the programme for the coming year. And thirdly, the action tracker. So are there any questions or comments on the report in general, apart from those 2 specific parts? Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chair. It was very quick. I sort of popped my hand up because I was pre-planning to anyway, having checked the action tracker, because obviously a lot of those actions fall into my portfolio area. And I just wanted to clarify that every single one of those has been fed back and raised with our waste officers. The difficulty that we've got in getting those through is obviously the sort of continued service recovery from the initial contract launch and balancing the new actions that we're trying to push through with that work, and then being hit by the pandemic. So what I want to take away and do offline outside of this meeting is prioritise and work through with Carol as my deputy on the action tracker items, and figure out what might be achievable as we start to move the waste and recycling service through and into recovery phase. So if there are any items on that list that members feel are of particular weight and importance, please let me know outside of this meeting and we'll do our best to move those actions forward.
Thank you. Anybody else on the general issues? No. Let's move on then to the programme for the rest of the year. So the first one, hopefully we'd only agree that Daniel can give his presentation. So I think that the content of tonight's meeting is fairly well fixed. The second meeting, I think, is described as a new normal. I think one of the things that we all recognise is that there are some significant opportunities from an environment and climate change point of view, presented by the different ways that people have started to do things. There are also some significant issues as well. But it's created a change in the way in which the council does things. And I'm particularly keen to ensure that when we either make decisions that we're going to continue doing things, or that we think about how we go back through some sort of recovery program, that we think about the environmental implications of that, and use this as an opportunity to reduce our carbon footprint, reduce the amount that people need to travel where that's possible, and deal with issues such as the air quality issue that was raised by overheard scrutiny. And I think that's the intention, that we should try and look at that in September. I hope by then, I mean, it's clearly enormously difficult to know what's going to happen, but I think by then the council will start to be working through a plan that probably sees more of the offices open, more of the services operating closer to the way they did before. So I think that's probably a good time to be able to do that. And then, as Elizabeth has mentioned, there's some significant things we want to look at around food waste and waste and recycling in general. And then I think the last meeting, it's important that we don't just generate ideas, but that we actually ensure that there are some actions, and that can be us recommending what the Cabinet should be doing or what the Council should be doing. But last year we spent a lot of time coming up with things that we might do. And I think going forward, we need to spend a bit more time talking about how we're actually going to make those happen and see if they have happened and take the steps necessary to make sure they do happen. So any comments, questions on the proposed work programme? No? Everyone happy with the work programme?
Councillor, I don't know, Julia Sanders raised her hand. I don't know if you want to take that now or wait for...
Yes, okay. I'll let Julia, brief comment if you like.
Julia, are you able to, did you want to speak or?
I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No.
Okay, sorry. Okay, yeah, I just I went through all the action tracker and I could see lots of actions from some of the later meetings and feel perhaps we didn't capture them all, from some of the earlier meetings. I just wonder if we're waiting too long till sort of next February to try and sort of get some clear sort of ideas of what projects, what action projects the council's doing. It feels, I don't know, it feels like it'd be nice to see some clear sort of real new projects direction or something a bit before that. That's just my only comment.
Thank you. I think that's probably a reflection of the fact I didn't explain what I meant by that. The intention is not that we shouldn't do anything until next February. The intention is that next February, having had the panel meeting for nearly 2 years, we should look back and see what we've managed to achieve. What I hope is that at each of the meetings we'll have a bit more time focusing on what we actually need to do. So my apologies if I gave the impression that we won't know the check we've done anything until the end of the year. But that's kind of a review. How do we need to change the climate change strategy? So it's not an intention that we don't take any action till then. Is everyone content with the work programme then? Okay. Let's move on then to the action tracker. And Elizabeth has commented on some of the waste-related issues. Are there other comments or questions on the action tracker? No? Okay. And I think one of the things that we probably ought to add, and I appreciate the difficulty of doing this perhaps at the moment, but I think on the ones that are still ongoing, I think we ought to add a column that indicates when we're expecting them to progress. And in fact, we ought to do that on the ones that are outstanding as well. So if we can add a column, and I think we all understand that things may change, but we do need, I think, a target for each of these when we're expecting to be able to make progress on them. So if we could add that the next time, is that okay, Ruben? Thank you. Claire, you wanted to come in.
Yes, just looking at them and you, with your comments, I would also have thought for some of these we might be able to get some updates, you know, just ongoing is a bit bland. And if I just take sort of the first one, the proposal for surveying clients on the best before hitching food rescue and assess needs client base. I mean, that particular group are very active at the moment. A lot of work going on in that environment because of the impact of COVID. So just to have sort of ongoing, is there a way to sort of prioritize some of these and actually get sort of update statuses when we meet, please?
I think there's actually 2 points there. I think where something's happening, it would be good, and I appreciate there's some logistics issues here, it would be good to actually record here what's happened. I think that would be useful. I mean, I think in terms of prioritizing, I think that's a separate issue. I think that's something that maybe the panel would want to take a view on, which of these are a priority. Well, they're clearly all a priority, but which are the highest priority.
I mean, just coming back, I mean, some of these, because of the environment we're now in, until we get more back into what I would call more of a normal type of way of working, we will not be able to progress them. So it's kind of maybe ongoing, maybe on hold would be a better terminology for it, if we know that we're not able to progress them at the moment.
Yes, I think that's probably a good point as well. There are some where ongoing means there is something happening, and the other means there was something happening, but it stalled, and we're waiting for an opportunity to restart that. Can we capture that in the tracker for next time, Ruben?
Yes, we can. And I pick up Councillor Strong's point, and particularly with Best Before Cafe and Hitching Food Rescue, we spent the last 8 weeks making sure they had food parcels and they were well supported. So I get what you're saying, and there's that balance about giving you information that's relevant to this panel and acknowledging that we've been doing other things and, you know, supporting those vulnerable groups. But I do take your point that absolutely we can provide some updates going forward and throughout the year as we progress those.
Gerald.
Thank you, Chairman. Following on the same thing, really, the action tracker. I just wonder, I mean, we all joined this panel for the right reasons because we're concerned about the environment and we want to see things change from our fairly low level in the hierarchy. But we've been meeting for months and months and months. We've had, I don't know, half a dozen meetings, half a dozen meetings perhaps over a long period. Have we actually made any, you know, has anything actually happened that makes a difference? I mean, it talks about meeting this and meeting that, I'm just looking at one of the items, which is complete, which is circulate Alex Inn's details to Green Space Manager regarding tree planting list. And that's completed, but have any trees been planted? Or I just don't know. I just wonder whether, it's all about actually making a difference. Call me a little bit cynical if you like, but are we making any difference? Sort of a general question, really.
We've planted quite a lot of trees. I think that was some specific information about tree species, if I remember correctly. And to be honest, I'm not clear what the species of trees we've planted are, but I know we have planted a lot of trees. I think that I think that's probably a point we need to think about and I think particularly we need to think about that when we're adding items to the action tracker. We need to make sure that we add items that will make a difference, rather than ones that won't.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, continuing on the same theme. I mean, looking at the action tracker, meeting 2 to be amended to cover swap running order of meetings. Meeting 4 will include. Meeting 5 will include. I mean, it's great stuff, but is it making any difference to the environment? That's my problem. I'm not really having a go at anybody. I'm just kind of observing, really.
Some will no doubt have had more impact on the environment than others. And as I said, I think that we need to think carefully about our actions going forward to make sure that we ask the officers to do things that will have an impact on the environment, rather than things that will have little or no impact on the environment.
Sorry, Jeff. I mean, I do understand there's a limit to what we can do, but it would be nice to know that we're making a difference. That was all. Really, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
We will try and get some more data in the action tracker about what's actually happened, as we spoke about. And as I said, I think we all need to make sure that when we suggest adding things to it, that we suggest adding things that will really change matters. Okay, next we have Carol.
Thank you. Yeah, so it was following on from what Gerald said, actually. I was just thinking that this meeting, the panels, they're designed really partly to engage with the public and to get ideas and advice from them. So I think it would be quite nice for the people who participated particularly to actually see something that's a list of things that have come out of the environment panel that they've contributed towards. Maybe that's something to talk about in the February meeting, but it sort of would draw everything together, and so you could say it doesn't have to be a very shiny brochure or anything, but you could have, these are solid outcomes that have come out, and those are then things that have come out of this panel. I think that would be quite a good way to tie it up, and maybe it doesn't have to wait till the February meeting, but aiming for that, I think perhaps would make sense.
Next I had Claire and then Michael.
Sorry, just coming back on the trees, and Steve, you made the comment that we've been planting lots of trees. As a council, we've always planted trees. So do we know how many more trees we've actually been planting as a result of being more committed to tree planting in the district over above what we normally have been doing, if that makes sense?
Well, I mean, tree planting is something, of course, that takes place in the winter. And over last winter, we planted, I think, around about 500 trees. But I don't know how many we planted the previous winter. But I think that there were some significant additional areas of planting that we did plant. But what the normal number is, I'm not sure. But it was that's the kind of number we planted. Michael.
Thank you, Steve. On trees, just to give you an update, seeing it's been mentioned, my Rotary Club I'm in, Baldock Rotary Club, have got permission from North Herts to plant trees on 2.5 acres of land, scrub land, which we've ploughed twice or rotavated. We're going to do that once more in hope of killing all the weeds, and we're going to plant just under 1,000 trees, and that will take place during November.
Yeah, that's good. That's one of the council's issues with planting large numbers of trees is that we don't have many suitable sites for very large numbers, but that clearly is one of them, and it's really good that the Walnut Rotary Club has been able to help to do that on some of the council's land. Gerald.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry to dominate the conversation. I asked the question about trees about 3 years ago, actually, and I was told that, I think I've mentioned this before, and I was told that we planted 500 trees over 5 years, which is about 100 trees a year, if I'm not mistaken, and that was to replace dying or diseased trees or trees that were dangerous. So we actually, over that period, 5 years, which is about 8 years, whatever it is, three plus 5 years ago, we effectively hadn't planted any trees. So I do hope that we've got the message now, we'll do something about it. Good to hear what Michael was saying. Thank you.
Well, I said we've planted at least 500 in the last planting season, and we are looking at plans that would result in many more being planted, not all on the council's land, but we clearly need to do much more just than keep pace with trees that have been removed. Okay, I can't see any more hands. So are we we'll get the action tracker updated along the lines suggested for the next meeting, so we get a clearer indication of what's actually happened on things. And then that moves us on to item 5, which is the presentation by the Transport Officer, Daniel Washington, who's going to talk about about transport and its impact on climate change and actions that we might take to address that. So, Daniel, over to you.
Can you hear me okay? Great. Right, and you can see that all okay? Great. Okay, so thank you, Chair, for inviting me along. Been asked to speak about reducing carbon emissions from travel and transport in North Hertfordshire. So to give you a roundup of what the council's currently involved with and looking forward sort of the future. Okay, so I think a good place to start is just to provide some context. So from a council perspective, council declared climate emergency last year, as did many other local authorities in the UK and also internationally. So it's a very topical as well as important issue. And to provide national context, the UK government in 2015 is a signatory to the Paris Climate Agreement. And then from that, since in 2018, the Road to Zero strategy was published as part of the government's industrial strategy, and it's from that has come policies around the phasing out of petrol and diesel cars with the replacement of electric vehicles, and then more recently 2019 the government published its clean air strategy. And I think bring it right up to date, there's been much comment and commentary on just one of the impacts of lockdown has been the reduction on air pollution, which has been noted. And certainly, I think within government circles, policy circles, there is this desire to want to try, for want of a word, lock in some of the benefits, if I can put it like that. That's not to lessen, obviously, what we're all going through. The benefits of reduced air pollution. And I'll touch a bit more on that with the government's recently announced DFT Emergency Active Travel Fund. So I think continuing, it's important to highlight what the council currently is involved with. And then because we are. So I think firstly to highlight North Herts District Council is a member of the Interlink Partnership in Hertfordshire along with all the other districts. With all the other districts and obviously the public transport operators and Hertfordshire County Council, and this is seeking to promote public transport and encouraging, the usage of it. And staying with the theme of public transport, recently, earlier this year, the government announced a series of funding competitions for different types of new bus service, one of which was the Rural Mobility Fund. And this is primarily aimed at trying to develop new DRT style services for rural communities, to provide public transport access that traditional bus services either commercially wouldn't be able to provide, or because of the nature of the roads that would be served, you just wouldn't get a full-size bus down them. So North Hertfordshire County Council has submitted a joint proposal in partnership with East Herts District Council and Hertfordshire County Council for a DRT service that would cover large parts of North Hertfordshire and East Herts, as well as Stevenage being sort of a main destination for employment, education, obviously healthcare with the Lister Hospital, and for main shopping. The DFT, just by way briefly of explanation, the fund, how it's structured is there's two phases to the fund. The first phase will be for a shortlisting by the DFT, and if the scheme is shortlisted, then over the summer, the scheme will be worked up in more detail to then be submitted again, and then if it makes it past phase 2, then it should be being funded. It's been shortlisted by the DFT, and if it is successful, then we're looking at a launch of spring 2021. So in terms of the announcement on phase 1, the DFT, all it's saying is an announcement in the summer. So that could be tomorrow, but equally it could be September. So watch this space on that. So that is something that is potentially could be happening. And then moving on, as some of you are probably aware, the council is developing its own EV charging strategy. Again, obviously this is very much risen up the government's agenda, but certainly long before the current situation with coronavirus, this is something that officers have been looking at. And very briefly, the approach that we're looking to take is that the district council will focus on off-street EV charging, because concurrently Hertfordshire County Council are developing an on-street EV charging strategy. So we feel that the sensible approach would be, let county focus on the on-street, we'll focus on the off-street. By off-street, that's like car parks as an example, but it could be other opportunities as well. There is quite generous government funding and grants out there towards this. They're very keen to see the take up. So, ourselves, along with many other districts, are very keen to tap into this. In addition to EV cars, we're also looking at the potential to, for e-bikes, e-buses. I'm sure some of you will have noticed this weekend just gone was the launch of some trials of e-scooters by government. Whilst we're not looking at e-scooters currently in the district, what we're hoping with the strategy is to at least have it flexible enough so that as new technologies come along, could be e-scooters as an example, I guess we'll need to see, are they just a passing fad, or are they going to be something that becomes permanent? And obviously having the strategy in a way that can incorporate that. So again, this work is ongoing, but once it's in place, then we will be looking at a program of rolling out the introduction of EV charging units across the district. At the same time, we're also developing a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. This is originally a policy recommendation by the Department for Transport that encourages all local authorities to develop an LSWIP. In our case, we're working jointly with Hertfordshire County Council on producing one for the district. Essentially, what LSWIPs seek to do is to identify the key or the main cycle and walking routes in it could be just one conurbation, it could be a whole area. There's no restriction. There's tools available, and the idea is once the LSWIP is completed, as funding opportunities come along, then the routes that have already been identified that will be prioritised for funding and delivery. So that could be through Section 106 funding, or it could be through periodic government grants specifically for cycling and walking as examples. So we're hoping, currently aiming to have the LSWIP, certainly the first draft, ready for consultation spring 2021. This will look at all the main conurbations in the district from Nebworth right through to Royston, as well as some of the interurban corridors and the main villages as well. So to be clear, it's not just a Hitchin LSWIP or a Letchworth LSWIP, but they will be in there. So looking, as I say, so spring next year to have that adopted, and then but it will also be a living document. So obviously, as new development comes along or there's changes to, it can be adapted. That's the whole idea. So it will be regularly reviewed. And government also, as well as encouraging local authorities to have one in place, further incentive is by having this for future funding opportunities, it may strengthen any bids from the district council to government funding by having the LSWIP in place. So it's worth having it for that as well. Okay, moving on. Staying with the cycling and walking theme, and I touched on this earlier, the DFT Emergency Active Travel Fund. Now, this is a separate funding agreement recently announced by government. This is very much related to reallocating road space for cyclists and pedestrians. Hertfordshire County Council was awarded, or allocated, I should say, approximately £8.5 million. And that's in two tranches. The first tranche, approximately £1.5 million. And Hertfordshire County Council, because of the very short timescales, all local authorities, and to be clear, the funding is going either to where it's two-tier local authority arrangements, the upper tier, or county council, or unitary, where it's the unitary. For the first tranche, Hertfordshire County Council, as did all those involved, had a very short time frame to put forward schemes. However, with the tranche 2 funding, there is more time to work up ideas, proposals, and there have been initial meetings with officers in highways, and along with all the districts, we've been asked to submit proposals. So we've started doing that, and already ideas have gone in for Hitchin, for Letchworth, Baldock, and Royston. More will be following, and Great Ashby as well, but more will be following. So that's not the sum total. And obviously, there's proposals going in from all the districts, I assume. So it's unlikely that every scheme that goes forward from North Herts will be shortlisted, but hopefully there will be some there from North Herts that are will make it, as it were. I think the key thing with this is it's looking at corridors, ironically, that where there's good public transport, that because the government is encouraging people currently not to use public transport, that they can cycle instead. So it feels a bit of a strange scenario, but that's the situation we're in. So that's the kind of corridors and the areas that we're looking at. So my understanding in terms of timescales that the Hertfordshire County Council is still awaiting specific guidance from government on the tranche 2, what the detail, but there will be perhaps month to 2 months to work up proposals that can be submitted. And these don't just have to come from the district council, and I would say to anyone, if you've got ideas, proposals, by all means, drop me an email, provide more information. That's not a problem. But we are submitting schemes there. Moving on. Sustainable travel towns. This is, again, another initiative that's going on concurrently. Now, the origins for this are Hertfordshire County Council's local transport plan 4. And towards the end of the document, there's a section on sustainable travel towns. And this is an invitation to towns throughout the county to put forward proposals to become sustainable travel towns. In the case of North Herts, 2 proposals have gone in, one from the Heritage Foundation for Letchworth Garden City and one from Royston Town Council. And in both instances, the District Council has expressed support for these. Currently, we're waiting for to hear from Hertfordshire County Council if either has been shortlisted and then what will be involved if they are. Again, this we would have heard by now, but because of the whole coronavirus delayed, but it is still in hand and we hope to hear within the next month. And then obviously if either or both have been shortlisted, then we can look to understand how we can work with the Town Council and the Heritage Foundation to take them forward. But to be clear, other towns, there is still opportunities to submit. It's not that there's a closing date. I think this is an ongoing scheme. And again, if other towns or locations come forward, certainly the District Council would consider them. And if we feel that we could support that, then we would. What should also not be overlooked is Section 106 funding for sustainable transport. And obviously, this is ongoing. The Council does currently have some 106 for sustainable transport of varying amounts for different areas. And in recent months, some has been used to pay for cycle storage in Letchworth and also in Royston. Working there with the transition towns, Letchworth have been very proactive. And we've been very happy to work with them on delivering some cycle schemes there. There's also obviously developer funding for bus services to make improvements, and recently saw the 16 in Royston using a combination of 106 contributions to pay for some enhancements to those bus services. So that you've got that, but also looking ahead, obviously with the emerging local plan, once that's adopted and the new, particularly the strategic development sites start coming forward, then we will, as officers, look to make sure that these new developments, where possible, green travel options are being encouraged. So whether that's EV charging points being installed, whether that's bus services serving the site from when the first resident moves in, so that it's there, cycle infrastructure across the board. So certainly the vision's there to want to ensure this. It's just a case of, as we all know, once the local plan's adopted, then I'm sure, activity will start to happen. But in the meantime, we can certainly sort of be looking at ideas of how these places perhaps could be best served. And then again, as some of you will be aware, last year we launched the Transport Forum. There's been 2 to date in November and then earlier this year. There would have been more, obviously, again, like so much at the moment, the Transport Forum got put on hold. But we are looking to restart the meeting soon. The next one will be on cycling, and it's been agreed with the chair and deputy chair of the forum. After that, we'll be walking and local bus services, but dates are still to be confirmed for that. But that is providing local groups the opportunity to engage on these issues. So it's certainly, as officers, putting it on our agenda, and we're very, conscious that for councillors as well, this is a priority for them, and so wanting to follow that up. So I think the Transport Forum is something that will develop with time, and how it kind of fits into that engagement process. I think what's important is it's there, and it's providing, say, local groups with a way in to raise these issues. And then finally, this is more about looking forwards. So I've read a list off of what could be considered quite, hopefully positive initiatives, but a disparate list. What we're looking at now as officers is how can we bring this all together? Not for the sake of just creating more titles or, window dressing, but to give it meaning, to give it coherence. So if you like, using the working title Sustainable North Hertfordshire, that's not fixed in stone. The idea is to bring all these initiatives together so there's a coherent approach. And I would, there's a number of local authorities that have adopted this approach. I know recently Watford Borough Council, with their, I believe, under the Sustainability Watford banner, has adopted this. And, you know, I think there's benefit, and it makes some sense to adopt a similar approach. But to be clear, there is the potential to widen the remit. So whilst tonight it's about transport, and obviously that's my area, if you like, we are open to the idea of, you know, the wider sustainability agenda. So whether that is waste or parks or recycling. Now, I don't want to speak for other officers, as it were, or other areas, but it's certainly something that we're interested in, open to, so that this whole agenda, and I think has been touched on tonight, so it's not just, so there's something to show for it. So there's results, you know, there's ways that me as an officer can be held to account. You know, if I say, well, we will do this, what does that look like, and when does it need to happen? That sort of concept, that way forward. And ultimately, what we want to look at is how can North Hertfordshire District Council become a model rural district, local authority, demonstrating the full range of sustainable initiatives, including transport, in a good way, creating a virtuous circle that, as well as engaging with neighbouring local authorities, sharing best practice in a positive way, not, you know, not to boast, but what we would like to think is we could become a district council such that what we're practicing here, other local authorities, you know, would want to get in contact, would want to come and talk to us and say, you know, how did you go about this? How did you get involved in that? You know, we have to start somewhere, but hopefully, you know, it provides a vision that can then be built upon going forward. So anyway, I'll leave it there for now. I'm sure you'll have questions, but hopefully that's kind of given you a flavour. But ultimately, if it is about, you know, reducing carbon from travel and transport, this is taking it in that direction. Obviously, there's limits to what we can do as a district council, but we can do something. It's not we can't do anything, but we have to start somewhere, and hopefully this is a step in the right direction. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Okay, so there's a couple of hands up already, so I was going to ask if anyone had any questions for Daniel. I'm not. Michael, you're first, and then Gerald. You're on mute, Michael. We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Daniel, thank you for an excellent report. My question is, cycleways in and out of Baldock, can you please let me have a copy of the schemes for Baldock so that I and my fellow Baldock councillors can look at it and hopefully give you some good input. If you can do that, you can do it by email for me. Thank you very much.
I'll send you that tomorrow.
Thank you.
And Gerald.
Thank you, Chairman. Very interesting that you've obviously got a very difficult job. My usual kind of questions. Is there any program for all of this? Because it's, I mean, they're great intentions, obviously, and quite difficult to deliver. For example, on the EV charging strategy, you go into London, I go there a lot, and there are big chunks of streets in London that actually do have EV charging in them. I don't know if it's the same anywhere in any of the cities of North Hertfordshire, is my first question. Second question is e-buses. I might be wrong, but I thought e-buses didn't have the range and they were kind of looking a bit iffy, but I could be corrected on that. Third question, I'm afraid, is similar to EV charging strategy. Cycleways. I cycle around London a lot. There are cycleways everywhere around London. It's the same in Cambridge, South Cambridgeshire anyway. There's a cycleway actually being approved now between Royston and Cambridge, but that obviously is mainly in Cambridgeshire, not in North Hertfordshire. I just wonder if there is actually a programme for some of these cycleways. And my last question is, what is a sustainable travel town? I hear about sustainable all the time. I never really know what it means. Sorry about that. That's my questions. Thank you.
Did I answer now? Okay, going through in the order you raised them. The EV charging strategy, my understanding is once it's formally adopted, then we will look to work up a program. So I think at this stage, it's have the strategy adopted. What we're very mindful of, yes, there are grants. The Energy Saving Trust manages government grants. There was a recent change in the funding arrangement. So before it was, well, it's 75% of a scheme that they will provide up to a certain amount. But you had to fund the work, the local authority had to fund the work first, and then when it was completed, send in your evidence, essentially you get your funding retrospectively. That has now been changed, that you can receive the funding in advance. Again, because the government is very keen to want to, push this. What we're mindful of is what has remained the same is that if the work is not completed at the end of the financial year, you will not get your funding. So it's leaving enough time in place that we don't commit to a scheme, spend, but we then miss out on the funding. So I don't fully know where the EV strategy is at in terms of formal adoption, but depending on when it's adopted and then how much time we have available, as it were, the window to submit an application to the Energy Saving Trust to then get the work completed. I think that's the crucial aspect. So certainly enthusiasm there. I would imagine that as when the EV strategy is adopted, then there will be those discussions with councillors to understand programme, locations, all of that. So I can find out the specifics and I can get back to you and provide you with an update. That would be helpful. Okay, right. Sorry, that was for e-buses. Very briefly, the technology is coming on. What's being looked at is induction charging. I know there was some trials in the Bristol area, and that's what's being looked at. So it's still very early stages, but the potential is there. It is there. Cycleways. I think the big boost here will be this funding from government initially. We'll have to see what schemes Hertfordshire County Council put forward. But if some of those schemes do come to North Hertfordshire, the County Council will have a very short time frame to get these installed. So I think we will see schemes appear this year, and then that may then provide the incentive to build upon that and develop further. So I'm very keen to see it rolled out. So I hope that, well, we will see schemes this year, and then we can then build on those. And obviously the Royston one is going to be interesting. That's the Greater Cambridge Partnership of partly given the go-ahead for the Melbourne Greenway. Hopefully this will lead to the bridge being built over the A505 coming into Royston, and then that, potentially you'll be able to ride off-road from Royston right through to Cambridge, which I think will be brilliant. And then sustainable travel towns. My understanding, it's essentially sort of the full range. So from trying to promote buses, rail, cycling, walking, EV, kind of with the key players locally, getting everyone together and say, okay, what does the strategy look like? What do you want it to do? How do we deliver this? County Council being clear, there is no additional funding from them, but it may be that it's using 106 funds. It could be working with the bus operators or others, employers, to say, okay, how can we bring this together and make it greater than the sum of its individual parts and giving it a real focus? So it's my understanding this isn't something that's really been tried before in Hertfordshire. So it could be interesting. It might be really successful. It may not, but I think it would be a good chance to find out what works and what doesn't.
Thank you, Daniel. Michael, you want to come back?
Yeah, Thank you. Just to say thank you for that explanation. I hasten to add, I'm actually not making a political point here about any. It's always been the same, which is I've always made the same points. Is things unfortunately do appear to be very slow to happen, but it's not new. It's always been the same. Thank you.
We need to do what we can to change it, but it's tough to do that. Yeah. Michael, and then Mike. Michael, you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry to come back on a second one. It annoys me having vehicles stationary with their engine switched on. There was a lorry in Whitehall Street I was told about that was parked for an hour and a half with the engine running all that time. I was a witness to a lorry in Tesco's car park for a good hour with the engine running. I told the supermarket manager that it was not on, but we need some law. I'm not quite sure whether it's got to be government or whether we can do it ourselves within North Herts. No engine running when the vehicle is stationary. Thank you.
I think actually the highway code says that's already the case. But Daniel, is there any more that we can do about that?
I can't comment on the legality, but what I can say is we are looking at trying to develop an anti-stationary vehicle strategy. Initially looking at working with schools, so with the school run, parents dropping off, picking up, but leaving the engines on. I've seen some examples near me of schools in the Epping Forest district, taking some pictures to say, okay, is this something that we could do? So again, it's certainly on our agenda. It's something that we want to talk to Hertfordshire County Council about and see if there perhaps could be a joint approach with this to take this forward. Start with the schools and then other locations, take it from there. So I think it's certainly a real possibility.
Thank you. Mike.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Daniel. Just a few questions from me, and sorry if I missed this. Have there been any targets from central government in terms of how many EV points are required across the district or maybe the county, or even, are there any targets for the amount of sort of miles of cycle lanes to put in or something like that? So I was just wondering if they guide us in that respect. Another on the cycleways, any idea when we will hear about those, which bids were successful? And again, sorry if I missed that, from Hitchin or Letchworth, from HCC. And you mentioned using Section 106 funding for some schemes potentially. Any idea roughly how much is available for these sorts of sustainable transport options? Thanks.
Are you happy for me to answer that now, Chair?
Sorry, I was asking you to, but I was on mute.
Okay, first question, targets for both, no. Currently, there are no government targets for either. That's not to say that won't change, but as it currently stands, it's very much left to local authorities' initiative, and that probably reflects what you see on the ground. Obviously, funding is crucial, but if it's considered a priority, then there'll be more. I'll say no more than that, but I think that's probably what reflects what you see on the ground currently, but that may change. In terms of the Tranche 2 funding, at this stage, we don't know. All I've been asked by Hertfordshire County Council is to prioritise having schemes submitted. So approximately every day, I'm emailing them over proposals, ideas, so that at least they've got something. My understanding is that when that goes forward from county, there might be a period of about, say, a month, maybe 2 months, while that gets assessed. But I think at the moment so much is up in the air, being delayed because of the whole coronavirus. We'll see. Again, I mean, if the government considers this a priority, then it may get fast tracked. So it very much is a fast moving situation. 106, it really does vary. I mean, one of the tasks, since certainly I started with the council last year, is looking at understanding what sums we've got for sustainable transport and essentially trying to spend those sensibly. So it really does vary. We've got some very small amounts for some of the villages in the west of the district, right through to Royston, where just last week I found out we've got over 100,000 for sustainable transport in Royston, and then other stuff coming forward. So even I'm still finding out exactly what we've got. We do have some for Letchworth. I'm aware of that. I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head, and I believe some maybe still for Hitchin. But it's sort of new pots are emerging, historic developments, etc. So if you've got any specific locations in mind, it might be worthwhile letting me know, and then I can try and find out what we've got, if we've got, and how much.
Okay.
Thanks, Daniel. Sorry, can I just come back quickly, Chair?
Yeah.
Just thought of another one. As we're talking about sustainable transport, maybe between different areas, can you not link Section 106 money potentially between different areas? I don't know if that's a question for you or maybe planning, but
Daniel, you want to?
It's all very much in the wording of the agreement of the 106. So some have a level of flexibility, others it's very specific, and there is a level of inconsistency in that. But generally speaking, normally most 106s will be for an area. So the Royston 106 can only be in Royston. There's always potential to, if you've got two areas nearby, to link it up if you've got the funding. So you can, in a good sense, be creative. It all comes down to what you've got available, the locations, but certainly from my experience elsewhere, that's certainly an approach that can be taken, and I have taken. So certainly I would always look to see, if that approach can be done.
okay. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks. Claire.
Yes, I was just going to come back and answer that question, actually, because there has been a precedent set, and it happened when they were refurbishing the changing areas, I think in the swim centre in Hitchin, and they stole some of the 106 money that was from the villages in and around and put it into that project. So it has been done. I have to say, as somebody who represents a village, wasn't very happy, because I would have rather seen that leisure money spent in the villages who don't get don't get council leisure facilities themselves. It's their parish councils that provide them, but it has been done. But I think, again, if we're looking at it, I think if there is money available, that the rural areas also need to have the money spent on their transport needs, as opposed to putting it into the towns.
I think, as Daniel said, it depends very largely on what the agreement made with the developer says as to where it can be used. Okay, there are no members indicating. So, Julia, you're indicating, I think you wanted to ask Daniel a question, but we're also moving on to the public participation. So now is your opportunity not only to ask Daniel a question if that's what you want to do, but also to say what you want to say to us. So, Julia.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it was an interesting talk. I'd quite like to ask Daniel if he can share with us what he's proposed for Letchworth, so we can see what went in, because I suppose what I'd like to feed back a little bit is what it's like to be a member of the public that's actually quite active in this area. I've got a group of cyclists I work with and have, for about 4 years now, trying to work out what will make Letchworth easier to cycle in. And we put ideas in, and we seldom get much back, actually. You know, we don't get things costed, we don't know what's happening. So from the public's perspective, although there's forums where we can have a 5-minute slot, if you're really active and interested, it's actually incredibly frustrating. You don't know what's going on. And I do get this feeling of deja vu that yet another report's written, either let's have a better connection between Baldock, Letchworth, you know, Hitchin. I've read so many reports, but it'd be lovely to see more on the ground and these things moved on. So I'd just like to sort of say it's quite frustrating as a cyclist when you're trying to get your kids on their bicycles to just see more and more reports. And also actually what I hoped was going to be a local cycling strategy is now going to be written by Herts County Council. And do they even know the area well enough to do it? So I just think as councillors, you might want to keep an eye on what's actually coming through and whether it meets local needs, because it quite often doesn't feel like it. The other thing I want to sort of mention is cycling. It's all very well saying, and a lot of the strategies we see say, let's have this link to that link. But of course, cycling's actually about a network. If you go to Holland, there is a network of, you know, one lane leading to another lane, getting you to all sorts of places. And I think England's got a long way to go to get to where we need to be a real cycling, you know, town. So I recognise how expensive it would be to sort complete networks out like in Holland. But I do feel that there should be a plan for a network, even if it takes 20 to 30 years to get the whole lot in. And what I don't see yet for North Herts and probably anywhere is a vision for a network that we are gradually working to complete. We don't draw the network. We just do bits and bobs that we don't even know how they're going to interconnect to each other. So mine is a plea for you as councillors, not to go and produce me a network next year, but to have a vision for a network for cyclists, because until we do that, I just think we're just going to have hodgepodges, and that's where we seem to be. And the other thing I'd like to say, always we're talking about linking one town to another town, but there is an awful lot of car travel goes on within a town. So in Letchworth, 30% of children are going to school by car. You know, at the moment we're trying not to use buses, but to get them off buses, you'll have to have safe cycling routes, and we don't have that. So it's all very well coming up with, you know, and it'd be interesting to see what's gone in for Letchworth. But if we're just looking at how we connect to Hitchin, then actually an awful lot of car travel will go on within the town still. And so I would say, please don't ignore the difficulties of cycling within the town and the places that make it hard for our children to get to school, for us to get to the station. Can we not lose focus on actually sorting those pinch points out to actually get us back on the roads? So that's what I want to say really on it.
Okay, thanks very much. I think you make good points. Daniel, I know, has done lots of work in terms of looking at cycle routes. And I know he's been out on his bike doing it, so it's not been a desktop exercise. He's posted lots of pictures of places where he's identified need for more cycling infrastructure, and I'll let him talk about that in a moment. But I think that there clearly is an issue that what we've tended to have is a series of pieces rather than a coherent whole. And I can't help but compare the situation with that in Cambridgeshire, where they've planned a series of routes. They're not going to be able to build all of them at once, but they actually have a plan. And it's perhaps easier because everything in Cambridgeshire connects into Cambridge. But I think that's clearly the sort of plan that we need. I think, as I said, Daniel has done, I know, a lot of work, but I think there is an interesting point raised about how we're making what we're doing in that respect visible. And I know that some of it is not going to happen from the present round of funding, and there's a problem. We don't want to raise people's expectations unduly, but I think perhaps we need to think about how we communicate more about what we are doing in that respect, and allow people to feed into it. So, Daniel, would you like to come in on that?
Thank you, Chair. Okay. Julia, more happy to email you the Letchworth proposal, and again, I'll email you that tomorrow.
Great.
Okay, so feel free to comment. I would just say some of the ideas I took from the transition town leaflet or that you provided me with, because I thought there was some really good ideas in there, so sort of trying to pick up that. I completely agree, networks. I mean, in the media, you know, we've been asked to put forward ideas, so let's get ideas in, and then it may be, how do we join this up as a network? Maybe not the most ideal way, but I agree with you there. You want a network so people within towns can cycle safely, as well as looking at the kind of interurban as well. I mean, some of the areas I've been looking at, and some of the where it's in a bit of in need of a bit of TLC, is in sort of trying to pick up some of that as well. So as one example, there are others. The road leading out of Letchworth up to Fairfield Park, there's a cycleway on the left, but it's a little overgrown, if I can put it like that, with some of the cycle signs even almost lost to the hedge. And it strikes me you could have a relatively simple win, just it requires some trimming and perhaps some fresh paint on the ground. And you know, and I've included that example because, you know, as we're probably all aware, you've got obviously the Fairfield Park development. There's a lot more development in that area of Central Beds adjoining us, and I would imagine for most of those new residents, Letchworth Garden City is their nearest station at Arlesey, and they will be coming to Letchworth, which in one sense is good, but obviously what we don't want them all to do is jump in the car to come to Letchworth. So my thinking is there, well, if we can get a cycleway that's largely there in a usable condition, we might be able to encourage, and we can work with Central Beds. So, okay, how can we liaise with you to encourage your residents and say, look, there is this cycleway that you can cycle safely into Letchworth. So simple things like that. But ideally, yes, I agree. You'd sit down. What would the network look like? How do we progress this? But hopefully, as I say, you know, this new funding opportunity hopefully can be a spur to really start taking some schemes forward. And say where 106 funding comes along, then perhaps we can, you know, target that in as well. As I'm conscious, absolutely agree. You know, you can have strategy after strategy after strategy, and if it doesn't achieve anything, then why have another strategy? If by having the LSWIP, it means that for future government funding opportunities, we can, you know, kind of give us that head start, if I can put it like that, then I think it's worth it. Obviously, we don't know when these funding opportunities will come along, but if this is now high up on the government's agenda, then let's have that LSWIP in place, and then we can start to build that network as funding comes along. So, yeah, no, we'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, does anyone else have any questions for Julia at this point? Okay, then we'll move on to John Webb. John.
Yes, Steve, I'm here. Can you hear me?
You can? Yes.
Good. I have a bundle of points that I've noted. If I run through them, perhaps you can pick up any that are worth responding to now, and any others can wait or whatever. Is that okay?
Yep.
Right. First one is the Environmental Committee's role, the Cabinet Panel's role within the District Council. I don't think we're bothered about whether it makes particular differences. We understand why councillors would be very interested in that, because it's their time being taken for the meetings. What we're actually interested in is using this as a window into the council to keep track of the environmental aspects of all main matters, and how the council is influencing, or how this committee is influencing or enabling or informing or monitoring on the main initiatives. We're not looking to minor differences made by this committee. I think that would be angels on pinheads. And in particular, it might be worth tracking the action items in two categories. One is administrative, which, though important, may not have an external world and demonstrable effect, and substantive ones that do. That's just that point about the role of this committee. Next point, when you're ready. DFT funding. What public consultation was there by North Hearts District Council? If none, then that could be well understood within the COVID-19 outbreak, but it would be bypassing the public democratic process for review and input. That's a comment in passing. Next one is Hearts County Council structural sustainable travel towns proposal. Again, did North Hearts District Council consult on this, or just take the Heritage Foundation's proposal stroke plan stroke report and put that in? Again, that would bypass democratic interaction and input. Next, I note there's very little public participation here. Perhaps more notice was needed. And again, I would regard the COVID-19 outbreak as an obstacle to that from several points of view. Next to final point is about the transport forum. Again, it'd be easy for the public to be confused about the delineation between transport forum and this committee addressing environmental aspects of transport. So there's some kind of delineation needed there, perhaps, or maybe you've got it already. Final point, stationary vehicles with engines running. Now, that could be necessary, I imagine, if they don't have separate refrigeration facilities and they need the engine running for that purpose, if they're delivery vehicles. Also, it makes a difference whether they're on private land or, for instance, on supermarket premises. And I'd cite Highway Code Rule 123, which I Googled while you were talking, which says unnecessarily, vehicles shall not unnecessarily keep their motors running. Those are all my points, Steve. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I mean, I think in terms of stationary vehicles, there clearly are some that fall into the category of being refrigerated vehicles. But there's quite a lot of vehicles that one sees with the engine running where they're probably just refrigerating the occupants with the air conditioning. And it's a bit debatable whether or not they should be doing that. If I just run through the other points you made. I think you make a good point about the Transport Forum. The Transport Forum is supposed to be a transport users forum. What we're trying to concentrate on here is the environmental impacts of transport. And I appreciate that there are some significant overlaps, but that's the intention. In terms of the sustainable travel towns are something being promoted by the County Council. They did run a consultation on it. I think the district's position is it asked whether or not it supported the two proposals that have been made by the Heritage Foundation and Royston Town Council. And I think we've said that we did. But and I think your point about identifying which actions are substantive and which are administrative is a good one. And I think we spoke about that earlier, about making clear which were the important issues and trying to make sure that in future the actions that we put on the action tracker are the substantive issues rather than just administrative things that we need to get done. So thanks very much for your input on that. Julia, you wanted to ask a question of John or comment on John's input? Or
I just wanted to sort of throw a couple of ideas, perhaps a COVID related one, in that our shops and cafes have opened up, and of course our town centres are full of an awful lot of cafes and restaurants. is this the time? It would depend on the interest and what the cafes felt right, but clearly they need outside space for seating at the moment. And actually, maybe it's the time to try pedestrianisation, which would stop engines going round the town centres and things. Has anyone sort of in the council thought about the idea of pedestrianising a bit more area to give them outside space? Because also the other thing is, I noticed, like with the tranche money for the coming from the government, a lot of that, it seems to be around the idea of actually reallocating road space, you know, quick things you can do. And something I was reading said that Hertfordshire only got 75% of the funding it could have got, which maybe suggests that we weren't ambitious enough as a county. And have we been ambitious enough as a district, you know, and actually saying, let's get the road, you know, use that space that's currently cars, one-way streets, whatever it is, bollarding or pedestrianising, to actually, one, get the money that Hertfordshire should have had, the 100%, and two, could we help the COVID situation by trying out some shutting down of our high streets and pedestrianising them?
So some of that's happened in both Hitchin and Royston. And I think that the reason that it happened in those two is because they're both towns which, because of their layout, have narrow pavements. And there was, I think, the initial concern about whether or not it was possible for people to pass safely. I think it's taken a bit longer than was hoped to sort it out, but there is some degree of pedestrianisation in both Hitchin and Royston. A bit's been done and more is to be done. I think Letchworth missed out on the initial proposals because it has wide pavements that people can safely pass on. But I think you made the point that there's a need to look at some more of that. I think there's been some interesting discussions with people. You know, there are some people who say that the town centres won't survive if people can't park outside every shop. That seems to be a rather less prevalent view than it was, although there are still some people who say that. But I think we need to, and I'll ask Daniel to come in a moment, but I think we do need to press the county council to, yes, perhaps be rather more ambitious about some of the things it's doing, both in the town centres and round the edges of them, so people can get into the town centres satisfactorily as well. Daniel, do you want to, anything you want to say on that?
Okay, just on the tranche 1 funding, yes, it was correct that the county council only received 75% of the potential funding for tranche 1. I don't know why that was, but the figures released, you know, it certainly wasn't the lowest amount. There were other local authorities, it was substantially less that they received. For others, they did achieve 100%. In fairness to the county council, I know that they really did not have much time to put forward schemes. I think it was within about a week, maybe a little bit more, but you know, from when they had to get ideas in. With the tranche 2, obviously there is the opportunity to put forward ideas, and I would strongly advocate, if you have proposals, ideas, put them forward. I'm happy to forward them if that helps. Proposals suggested, you know, it's not restricted just to the districts. I mean, they've asked us, you know, and I've been, and you know, the last update I had, which was Friday, of districts that had submitted schemes for tranche 2, most had come from North Herts, of all the districts in Hertfordshire. Now, I don't know if that's changed as of today, but, you know, so I've been keen that we, you know, submit as many as possible, accepting that not all will be taken. But, you know, in theory, hopefully, the more you submit, the more chance some will be taken forward. But there is a narrow window of opportunity. So if you have ideas, let's say, if it helps, email them to me. I'm happy to forward them on. It's not a problem. I mean, that could include, for example, ideas like around pedestrianisation. Ultimately, Hertfordshire County Council will do the final shortlisting that goes to the DFT. That won't be the districts. All we're in a position to do is put forward ideas. But if, you know, there's no reason to preclude pedestrianisation schemes, but ultimately it will be Hertfordshire County Council that will decide whether it goes forward or not. So I say, you know, happy to put forward as many ideas of time that I've got to do that within the window of opportunity that we've got.
Thanks, Daniel. And I think it's, as I said, Daniel has done an enormous amount of work on this. There have been, he's cycled a lot of the places that he went to investigate, and has produced a lot of research information. So I think he's done a great job there. What I think we need to do is make sure that people are aware of the suggestions put in, and that within the limits of the available window, that if people have got other ideas, that they can be incorporated. And I'm pretty certain that the transition town Letchworth proposals, as Daniel said, be used, and I think that's probably equivalent elsewhere. Val, you had your hand up, but it's not up anymore. Is that because you don't want to speak anymore? Val, you're next if you want to speak.
Oh, thank you. I put my hand down because I thought that what I was going to say would be covered. Just a bit more detail for Julia. I was just reading the email which the council have got today from Tom Hardy, who is the Hitchin bid manager, about the experimental closure of the High Street, which is talking about happening from the 13th of July on an experimental basis, just to give Julia a flavour that things are happening.
Good, thanks so much for updating on that. Michael.
Yes, thank you. Daniel, you have 8 or 9 county councillors in North that represent North Hertfordshire County. Can I suggest that any ideas you send to county, you email us county councillors, so that when we've got the email, we know county's got it at the same time, and we can have words with the right officers to back any schemes that you put forward. So I think that should be a must that you do. And most of those county councillors are district councillors as well.
I think that's a sensible suggestion, Michael. Okay, I can't see any more hands. So Daniel, thanks very much for your presentation, and Julia and John, thanks for your input. We now get to the part of the meeting that's on the agenda as a discussion regarding reductions in emissions from transport. What I think we ought to try and do, particularly in light of our earlier discussion about the action plan, is think about things that we think the council can and should do, and what we can do to suggest that should happen. So, any inputs? Gerald.
As I said before, put a program together, put dates on things, and see what happens. I know it's not that easy in a council, but it'd be nice to see. Can I just raise one other point? It's a general point. It's slightly off the subject, but it does concern the environment. With the reduction in air travel down to virtually zero, presumably at the moment, does anybody happen to know what the prospects are for Luton Airport's expansion? Because they're saying that air travel will never be the same again, and therefore one would imagine there won't be the demand for the expansion of places like Luton. Anybody have any information on that? Thank you.
Their current plan is on hold. They said they're not going to proceed. I think they originally said they were going to submit an application in the summer, and they've said they're not going to do that. I suspect that they have no more idea than the rest of us as to what may happen in the longer term. But for the moment, it's on hold. It does seem unlikely that there will be a justification for the sort of growth. Well, it's unlikely there's a justification anyway, but it seems even more unlikely as a justification for the sort of growth that they were proposing. But we'll have to wait and see what view they take about that in the longer term.
Thank you. So that's one good unintended consequence, perhaps. Thank you.
Michael, did you put your hand up again, or did it not get taken down?
Sorry, I haven't taken it down.
Okay. Sam Collins, I noticed, joined us at some point while I was.
Can I just make the point that Sam is here as a guest in a way, because Carol Stanier is here in subbing for him. So
Indeed, could we have a vote? It doesn't seem very likely. Let him vote.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As Hilary just said, I'm here as a member of the public essentially, because I had a work function that meant I'd missed the beginning of this meeting. I just wanted to address a question came up earlier about the differentiation between the Transport Users Forum, which I chair, and this group. Just thought I'd answer that point in that the Transport Users Forum is primarily focused on the practical elements of transport use. So the cycling meeting that Daniel was talking about earlier will be focused on those practical elements. So if we do have cycle routes, where will they go? Do we need cycle lockers here? What do cycling groups, cyclists in the area want from us? So it's an opportunity for cyclists and cycling groups in our area just to feed back to the council, and we will feed that on to the portfolio holders and the cabinet as required. So that's all I really wanted to add.
Okay, Claire.
Yes, because coming back on the airport, because obviously my ward is adjacent to it, absolutely right on the updates that Luton Airport have given on their expansions. However, the thing that I find quite interesting reading, and that is what the airlines are doing, and they're all not predicting to have the numbers of flights and passengers travelling much before 2023, as I think is the last sort of forecast that they are looking for. But whether that means that they're going to be having loads and loads of planes running around and flying around that aren't going to be rammed to capacity, which is what they have been at the moment. But certainly, I think the whole airport expansion and the need for travel through the air will be looked at, and particularly as passengers themselves will have to decide whether or not they want to be up in the sky flying again, like we did sort of 12 months ago. The other point I would make, and that as a council, and because we are a planning authority, and where we are having new developments put in, it's actually knowing that those have got planned into them either exit and entry points for cyclists, and a more cycle friendly structure, if you like, within them for cyclists. And I mean, that's something I think as an authority we certainly can have influence going forward. We've always talked, I mean, for years and years and years, we've talked about having a cycling strategy and cycling routes. And it's always been sort of limited by financing. And yes, there is, for new developments, there's 106 monies that's available. But I actually think it's the planning stage for those new developments, which really is where, as a source, we can actually bring those developers in and start making sure that they do look at that, because you don't have to always have on a new development, you don't actually have to have the cyclists coming in and out on the roads. You can always have other entry and exit points put in, like you do with pathways and footpaths and that are put in. But rather than just making them pathways, it's looking at them to be sort of cycleways as well.
I think that's an important point. I think another consideration is there are some areas where we've got cycleways built as part of new developments, but they finish at the end of the new development and don't join on to anything that will enable people to travel to stations or town centres. I think the other thing that we haven't talked about, of course, just before I call Carol, is the whole question of e-bikes and what effect they will have on cycling use. But Carol.
Yeah, so we've talked a bit about networks of cycle routes, and I think it's important that we have to have the plan of what we want to have before. We know we haven't got the money to do it, but you can build, if you know where you want to build the bits of path, then you can build that in afterwards. But if you haven't got an idea, then when you've got the money, then it's, well, where does it go? So I think the strategy does have to come first. I mean, I think that's the way that I know that Susan van der Ven got the Melbourne Greenway built, is that she basically, know, she found a bit of money here and a bit of money here and built a bit more, and it was another 100 meters, and then it was another 100. Now it's nearly reaching Royston. So, you know, it's taken years to do that, and you have to have the plan in place to do that first. So it's the plan, I think, that has to come first, which I think is what Daniel and the Transport User Forum are working on now, hopefully, from what I've seen. So I think that's the right way to go.
So I think in terms of, I agree with that. I think in terms of actions that might come out of our discussion this evening, is that we perhaps should be saying that actually the council needs to ensure that it does have a plan for a network that can be implemented as funds become available, and that we need to concentrate, I think, on developing coherent bits of that network. So we should try and add bits that produce something useful, which I think we've not always managed to do in the past. What are people's views about that? Yeah. So I think the action is that we need to engage with the we certainly need to engage with the planning function, including the executive member and deputy, about what we need to do, the planning and transport was therefore earlier, about what we need to do to make sure that we have those plans in place. And I think the other thing that's been raised is that we need to make sure that we engage with community groups, people who we are hoping will use these facilities in that process, because they will have good ideas to make, to input, and will benefit from that. So I think there also needs to be some public engagement in that process as well. Are people content that we should put that down as our action from arising from this evening's discussions? Okay, good. Well, I think that perhaps is also that one of the objectives of not having too many actions and not having actions that are only of an administrative nature, which Ruben will be pleased with, because it means he doesn't have to track many small actions, and hopefully will deliver us something worthwhile. Okay, thank you very much for your participation this evening. Thank you for all the inputs you've made. Thank you, Daniel, for your presentation, and thank you, Julia and John, for raising the points that you raised. The next meeting is the one, the date is currently not in front of me, but the one that will look at what we should do about the new normal, what the council should be doing to react to the way the world is going to change as a result of the COVID situation, and what environmental and climate change opportunities there are on the back of that. So I look forward to seeing you all again then. Thanks, Ed. Good evening.
2nd of September, just by the way.
2nd of September. Sorry, I mislaid on my screen the right document with that on. And Hilary will, I mean, it'll almost certainly be a Zoom meeting, but we'll need to make sure that we, as we get better at this, we get slicker at making sure the information is available, and make sure that people are aware when they need to, when and how they need to register if they want to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.